Shumai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. I'm your host, Dav Morse. It's my job to educate and inspire and equip people to live life to the full. Today we are taking a brief look at a topic not covered yet on the podcast. It is physical preparedness. Prepping. Yes, but not the wild American bunker with a shotgun type. This is prepping for normal people like you and like me. Wait for it. There we go. And a bit more. I was getting pretty pumped up by that music, singing along. Ba, ba, na, ba. If you do that as well, when you get excited about listening to the Life to the Full podcast, let me know over on Instagram or over on Threads. I'd love to hear from you. Now then, we are talking about preparedness. Now, how does this fit into Life to the Full? Well, I am curious about a lot of things. I'm curious about surfing, about drumming, about economics, about Welsh language strict meter poetry. And I came across this idea of physical preparedness, being prepared, from a financial point of view, really. But my interest in money and how it's created, how it's used, how we shape society, that is something that led me down this path of physical preparedness. Because we can prepare financially, and I encourage people to prepare financially. But being prepared for things like food shortages, power outages, the water not working in your house, those kinds of things, that's where this kind of rabbit hole started. And as I went further and further down the rabbit hole, I became more and more aware of the fact that this affects not just your finances, but also your mental health, your physical health, your relationships, and, dare I say it, even your spiritual health. If we spend time preparing for financial disasters, if we have an emergency fund, if we have our savings and retirement plan, then to me, physical preparedness is just a natural extension to that. The last few years have taught us that things can change, and things can change very quickly. Over the last few years, particularly since the special event that happened in 2020, prices have got out of control. Inflation has happened. Inflation hit double digits at some points a couple of years ago. We are all familiar with inflation. We are all familiar with how inflation works. The price of goods and services go up over time. That is the textbook definition of inflation. But what about hyperinflation? Hyperinflation happens when things go up in price so quickly that it's unreasonable for any sane person to keep up with that. I mean, you could say that we're in a slow stage of hyperinflation here in the UK. Hyperinflation maybe lasting about 50 years. But hyperinflation really is when it happens. That kind of increase happens over a really short period of time. There are some historic examples of hyperinflation. There are some relatively recent examples of hyperinflation. I don't know if you did history at school, but here in the UK, you might have studied the Weimar Republic. I did not do history, so everything I've learnt about the Weimar Republic has come from a monetary point of view. This idea that the price of goods and services increased so quickly, basically the mark became absolutely useless. Same things happened in Zimbabwe. Prices just go absolutely skyrocketing, go crazy in a really short period of time. Venezuela. when I was at university, one of my mates went and did a year abroad in Venezuela as part of his Spanish degree. Venezuela, in the early 2000s, was a wonderful country. Beautiful country, rich, economic. And even in a country which was doing very, very well for itself, hyperinflation still managed to take root. Hyperinflation, where the money supply increases so much that the value of the Venezuelan bolivar just dropped so much. And now, a few years ago, life in Venezuela was very, very difficult. There was lawyers and dentists and doctors and teachers having to give up their work just so that they could farm enough food to grow and eat, because there was no money, because the money that they had was useless. People would carry around backpacks full of notes, and it would just be worthless. In the Weimar Republic, we read of people burning banknotes, just chunks of banknotes, because they're worth less than the wood that you could buy with it. Argentina is currently slightly more stable than it was a few years ago. They've had a new president, Javier Milei, recently, but inflation is still a massive, massive issue. There are people in Argentina who will spend their money as soon as they get it, because if they don't spend it, then it's not going to be worth as much in a month from now or a year from now. They're not going to be able to buy as much stuff, so they might as well spend it now and enjoy it now. That's kind of inflation happening on a faster scale than is happening in the UK. And soon that will get to the UK. Things will speed up. The prices of things will go up and up. It's not yet as bad as things were in the Weimar Republic, when things in a very short time, about a couple of years, managed to completely devalue the mark as they were using. There's a story that I read of somebody ordering a coffee which was 5,000 marks, and then drinking it and ordering another coffee and thinking, oh yes, 10,000 marks, but instead he got a bill of 14,000 marks, and the server said to him, you should have bought both your coffees at the same time, because during that time the prices have gone up. It's absolute madness. People were being paid in sausages because the sausages would last longer than the value of the money. It's like that Liz Truss versus the lettuce. Who's going to last longer? What's going to last longer? The value of my mark or a sausage? Now, one of the questions that has risen for me from these stories of hyperinflation is who survives and who thrives in these times. Now, I read the book 10 Things Everybody Needs to Know About Money, and in there Linda Davis talks about how the farmers were the ones that were surviving, the farmers that were the ones that were thriving in those times of economic hyperinflation. And the reason that they were thriving is because they had actual real goods. Their money wasn't just paper money, wasn't just numbers on a screen. They had food, they had animals, they had crops, they had tractors, they had stuff that they could actually use. And essentially, if you can grow your own stuff, you breed your own animals, you can keep that cycle going outside of the financial system. You don't need money in order to make that work if you are completely self-sufficient. If you've got food and shelter, then your financial concerns can fade. And so it got me thinking, if I am going to go through a period of hyperinflation or prolonged high inflation over the next 10 years, what am I going to do? How am I going to be physically prepared? can I do anything to move towards being a bit more self-sustainable? When money collapses, real goods, food, heat, shelter, those are the things that matter. Here's a short little extract from a Spiegel International article about the Weimar inflation. Most farmers also did extremely well. They had money to burn and spent it willy-nilly, writer Leon Frochwanger recalled. Some bought themselves entire stables or racehorses, others expensive cars. Farmer Grindberger drove from the grimy village street of Ehringschachling to Munich in an elegant limousine, complete with a chauffeur, while he himself was dressed in a brown velvet jacket and a green chamois tufted hat. Furtwanger wrote of the rural rich. If you've got physical items, physical things, food, water that people are willing to buy, then you can do very well in a situation like this. So what is preparedness, really? Well, there's a scale. And I like to think of the scale as going from taking an umbrella when you leave the house, just in case it rains, all the way to having an underground bunker and years' worth of food stored somewhere abroad, preferably, in a different jurisdiction to the one that you currently live in. Those are the extreme ends. And I'm not talking about extreme prepping. I'm not talking about having your bunker. I'm talking about the peace of mind that comes through basic preparations, basic preparedness. You don't need to be a survivalist, but you don't also want to be helpless. This is one way which contributes to living life to the full. When you are not as stressed about the situations going on, you can enjoy life more. You can do more of the things that make your heart sing. You can do more of your life's work when there is a level of mental stability that comes from being physically prepared. So what are we actually preparing for? These are some of the common and realistic challenges that we might face. Many of my listeners here in the UK, some in Germany, Guten Tag to you, some in America, and then a smattering of other countries all over the world. But we are mostly going to be preparing for things like a job loss. If you get fired from your job, or if you find that your work is making you unemployed, then having 6 months worth of emergency food stored in your house makes it a lot easier. It gives you that extra time and space to think, well, I don't need to worry about buying food. I can just use up the stocks that I have. Having 3 to 6 months worth of food stored at your house just takes the financial pressure off a little bit, knowing that you can just cook the food, eat the food that you've already got in the house. It means you don't have to worry about spending money on food when you've got a job loss and you are not getting a paycheck every month, and you need to think, I need to put my energies into finding a new job, finding more work. Having that, not only a financial buffer, I often encourage people to have an emergency fund, a fund of money, 6 months, 3 to 6 months, up to 12 months if you're that way inclined, just to take some of the financial pressure off. But it doesn't have to be just money, as we've just talked about. It can be physical food that will last for 3 to 6 months. It can be enough just to take the pressure off a little bit. We are preparing for power outages. Now, power outages in the UK don't tend to last very long, maybe a few hours. We did see in the news recently power outages across Europe where things were down for days, and so having a way to prepare food, to cook, to heat your home, to have maybe a wood-burning stove so that you've got a place to gather around as a family when there's no heating and there's no power, but you can start a fire and you've got some logs in the garage, logs somewhere where you can just bring them in. You can have at least one hot room. Alternative cooking provision like a camping stove, a gas stove, a propane stove where you can just heat your food, cook your food until the power comes back on. Those kind of things just make life less stressful. We might want to prepare for water supply issues. It's happened a couple of times in the last year where the water company have said, don't drink the water, it's coming out discoloured, it's not looking healthy. And I'm thinking, okay, that can be quite annoying. If you're not prepared, then it can be really annoying when you can't drink the water on your tap. What can you do to be prepared for providing your own water? Could you have a little mini soya filter, just to filter water? Could you have a rainwater collection system where you can then treat the water until the water comes back on? Having a case of bottled water under your bed is probably enough for most people to get started. Next time you go to Lidl, pick up a crate of 24 Brecon Carreg, and then that will last you a little while until the power comes on. So it just takes the stress out of what is otherwise a stressful or annoying situation. What happens if we have supply chain disruptions? What if we have empty shelves in the shops? What if we have difficulty getting eggs? I saw a lot of fuss in the US news recently about eggs being so expensive because they're so hard to come by. If you've got some food put by, some food to last you a couple of weeks where you don't have to worry about going out to the shops, leaving the house, that can also help in another lockdown situation or a natural disaster. We don't tend to have many natural disasters in the UK. But if you live somewhere where there is a hurricane season or a tsunami season or a typhoon season, whatever it might be, having just some food and water, basic food and water set aside can make the whole thing a lot more straightforward. In South Wales, things usually blow over quite quickly. But what if they don't? I was entertained by a BBC programme, BBC 3-part drama called The Way. And what had happened is the steelworks in Port Talbot had been taken over and had been shut down, and it had caused some civil unrest, and it got to the point where it was then illegal to leave Wales to go into England. So there was people smuggling people across the Welsh-English border, and it was a little bit apocalyptical, and it was quite entertaining, but it made me think the government could just shut us down again. They could just say no more movement. They could just say stay where you are. And if that happens, do I want to be physically prepared for that? Some of the practical examples from my life, touched on them already. When I think it was during a lockdown actually, my daughter and I, as part of the homeschool experience, we created a DIY water filter. So we got charcoal, we got sand, we got rocks, we got some kind of netting, like material to catch all the bits, and we filtered water so that it was clean and safe to drink. And she loved it, and so if it's something that can bring your family together, you can do a little activity with your kids, it's actually a really fun thing to do. Another thing that we've done is we've spent the weekend with no power. So we did it as a little experiment for the weekend. What happens if we just didn't use the electricity in the house? We can pretend that there's no electricity. How could we survive the weekend? And it was quite entertaining. It was challenging. We didn't have any Wi-Fi, so we had to rely on our phones. We couldn't charge our phones in the house, so we charged them in the car. We didn't have any hot water, so we used the gym showers. Now you could say, oh, that's cheating. And yes, to some extent it is. So it highlighted some of the things that we needed to prepare for better, some things that we weren't ready for. So by putting yourself in the scenario, you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. And we figured out that, heating water, we don't have a very good system of heating water if the grid goes down, if the power goes out. And we didn't have enough lighting. We had a few torches. I've got a head torch, and we've got a torch each for the kids. But it really would have been nice to have like a big lamp, which we could have used as our lighting. So I'd encourage you, as a little challenge, why don't you try something similar? In thinking of preparing for what might happen, choose a little scenario. You don't have to make it a whole weekend. You can make it a day. Try going the day without water. And if that means buying a pack of bottled water or buying a water filter, making something with your child, go for it. It'll be fun. And it also creates that level of resilience so that when the situations happen for real, then you are that much more, not just physically prepared, but mentally prepared. One thing I mentioned earlier about growing your own food is if you can grow just a little bit of your own food, you're ahead of 90% of people. The garden has been sadly neglected over the last few years, but for a number of years before that, we're going to get back to it next year, the garden was a source of food for us during the summer. We would have tomatoes, we'd have chard, we'd have courgettes, we'd have beans, we'd have beetroot, we'd have gooseberries, we'd have apples and pears and strawberries and raspberries. And just being able to rely a little bit more on yourself and relying less on other people is just a wonderful feeling. You don't need a massive farm. You can just grow a few herbs or some backup supplies, and you can grow the things that save you money and that reduce your stress. So knowing that you could provide a little bit of your food. And I am very well aware that to do this hardcore, to go completely self-sufficient, completely off-grid, is not something that most of us want to do. No, not something that most of us are capable of doing, but it's something that we can take steps towards, little baby steps. I remember the first time I grew potatoes. I was like a child digging through the soil for buried treasure. And that feeling of rubbing my hands through the earth and searching for food, searching for these potatoes that I'd grown, and being able to pull out and say, yes, I grew these, I provided this for my family. That's an incredible feeling. I've already said that if you've got food and water and shelter, you can weather most storms. And even if nothing bad happens, you've got peace of mind. And that is really important. As a bonus, growing your own food puts you in touch with the seasons. It puts you in touch with your own environment, and it connects you to nature. And that has in itself links to positive mental health, links to positive relational health. So there are benefits more than just financial benefits. Preparedness isn't just physical. I've already said it reduces anxiety, it can build mental resilience, and it can create a mindset of proactive problem solving. One of the things I'm a big believer in is having agency over your own life. Being able to say, yes, I take responsibility for this. I take responsibility for feeding my family. I take responsibility for caring for them. I take responsibility for what goes into my body. And just being a little bit physically prepared, a little bit of preparation with food and water and maybe a few medical supplies, it goes a long way. Finally, on to a few off-piste preparedness topics. It doesn't have to be just food and water and survival equipment. It can mean being prepared for having an 80-year marriage. It can mean being prepared for what happens when the kids leave home. It means being prepared for having a long relationship. It's about building a life that can endure. Growing together in marriage takes effort and intentionality. And so being prepared for that future with your spouse starts now. And then the ultimate preparation is the spiritual preparation. What happens when you die? What preparedness have you taken part in to prepare your soul for the next life? Very interesting questions. Just to recap then, prepping isn't panic, it's peace. Panic is what happens when things go wrong and you're not prepared for them. Peace is what happens when things go wrong and you're prepared, you're ready. You cannot stop things going wrong in life. You cannot stop disaster from striking. But being physically prepared brings an element of peace. You don't need to go to the extreme. You don't need a bunker in Scotland. You don't need a homestead somewhere in Ohio, although both of those things would be wonderful, and I'd quite enjoy both of those things. But you don't need to go to that level. You can start small. Start by spending £10 extra this week on buying extra food or water. So you start building up that food stock. You start building up that pantry of things that you can eat in emergencies. Things like if you lose your job, if the shops are shut, if there's nothing you can buy. Having those can make a big, big difference. As I was putting this episode together, it was a bit of a random one. I just had a thought. I'm going to do an episode about prepping. So, thanks for bearing with me. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm thinking of making this into a potential series. There are so many places we can go with this, so many deep dives we can go in. So if you are interested, then you have to let me know, because I want to serve you, ultimately, dear listener. And if it doesn't serve you, then I won't do it. But if you think, yeah, I'd love to know more about how do I go about being prepared for a water disaster? How do I go about filling a pantry? How do I go about organising my food? That kind of thing. Then let me know, and I'd love it. I'll end with an encouragement. You're not powerless. A few simple actions can make you and your family more secure, more peaceful, and more present, and more able to live life to the full. Go out, get some food, get some water preps, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.